You're in the scary hub. Tonight, we're looking at 3 hunters who realized too late. They weren't the ones doing the hunting. Lock your doors. Turn down the lights and let's head into the dark. Story 1. The Man in the Hoodie. It was November 2021, North Pennsylvania. The air was so cold you could feel it in your teeth. I was 23, confident and alone. I had permission to hunt 70 acres of private land, thick woods with an old, rotting cabin that the forest was slowly reclaiming. I climbed into my stand at 5:15 a.m., total darkness. But as the sun began to bleed through the trees, I saw it, 60 yards away. A cheap ladder stand. It wasn't there last week. I checked the ground with my binoculars. No footprints in the fresh snow leading to it, except for one single trail of heavy boot prints that came from the deepest part of the swamp and stopped at the base of the ladder. At 8 a.m., the movement started. I expected a buck. Instead, I saw a man. No camo, no blazy orange. Just a dirty salt and pepper hoodie. He stepped from behind a tree and just stood there. He didn't have a rifle. He had a wave. A slow mechanical wave that said, "I've been watching you since you climbed up there." I didn't stay. I hiked back to my truck, my heart hammering against my ribs. But when I got to my vehicle, the driver's door was wide open. I know I locked it. My registration papers were laid out on the passenger seat like an invitation. I looked back at the tree line one last time. He was there. He didn't wave this time. He just dragged a finger across his throat and smiled. A smile that had too many teeth. Story 2. The Thing in the Texas Brush. Crockett, Texas. My grandfather's land is a place of silence and old traditions. It's 50 acres of dense thicket and twisted oak trees. Last November, we went out for a routine hunt, but the woods felt different, heavy, like the air was too thick to breathe. We had shot a decent-sized buck early that morning and hung it near the cabin to clean later. We drove into town for supplies, leaving the property for maybe 2 hours. When we returned, the silence was absolute. No birds, no wind, just the hanging carcass, swaying slightly. When we got closer, my grandfather, a man who's hunted for 50 years, went pale. The deer hadn't been eaten by coyotes. It had been systematically torn apart. There were deep, parallel claw marks across the ribs that looked like they belonged to a hand with 5 fingers. The chest cavity had been pried open, with such force that the ribs were snapped outward. It wasn't about hunger, it was a display. That night the sun dropped, and the temperature plummeted. We were sitting in the cabin, the only light coming from a small heater. When it started, a scream ripped through the air, a sound that started as a woman's wail and ended in a mechanical, metallic screech. It wasn't coming from the woods. It was coming from the edge of the porch. Like it weighed 400 pounds, began running laps around the cabin. It was moving at a speed no human or bear could match. We could hear it panting, a wet, raspy breath that hit the window pane, fogging the glass. Then the running stopped, total silence, and then thud, thud, thud. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the heavy oak door. It wasn't a random animal banging against the wood. It was a request to come in. My grandfather grabbed his AR-15, his hands shaking for the first time in his life. He didn't yell a warning. He just leveled the barrel and fired 3 rounds through the door. An unholy roar of rage echoed back, a sound so loud the glass in the windows rattled in their frames. We heard something heavy crash through the brush, snapping branches like they were toothpicks. When the police arrived the next morning, they were skeptical, until they saw the door. There were claw marks buried an inch deep into the solid oak, exactly 5 feet off the ground. No hair, no blood, no tracks, just the marks of something that had been waiting for us to open the door. Story 3. The Campground Screamer, extended cut. There are places in the high mountains where the air feels thin. Not because of the altitude, but because of the history. 3 of us, Kyle, Connor, and I, hiked 6 miles past the last marked trail. We wanted a place where the GPS wouldn't work. We found it, but as we hammered the last stake into the ground, I noticed something. The woods were dead. No birds, no squirrels, not even the sound of an insect. Just the creek rushing over cold black stones. The first night, the scream broke the silence at exactly 2 a.m. It was high, melodic, and terrifyingly human. It sounded like a woman crying out a name, but the wind muffled the words. Kyle tried to play the hero. He stoked the fire and told us it was a vixen, a female fox. But he slept with his boots on. He knew as well as I did. Foxes don't call out names. By the second night, the temperature dropped 20 degrees in minutes. We were huddled in the large 4-person tent. the only light coming from a single LED lantern dimmed to its lowest setting. That's when the running started. We heard the leaves crunching heavy. Bipedal strides. Thump, thump, thump. Something was sprinting in a perfect circle around our tent, just outside the reach of our flashlights. Every time it passed the door, the air would shift, as if a massive weight was pushing the wind. Then came the scratching. Scritch, scritch. It wasn't a claw. It sounded like a dry human finger rubbing against the nylon. It moved from the roof, down the side, and stopped exactly behind my head. I could feel the heat of something's breath through the fabric. It was heavy, wet, and smelled like rotted meat and wet fur. I whispered to Kyle to grab the rifle. He reached for it, and the moment his hand touched the cold metal, the scratching stopped. The forest went silent for what felt like an hour. Then the ground began to vibrate. It started in my chest, a low-frequency hum that grew into a roar. Suddenly, the scream didn't come from the woods. It exploded from right between our tents. It was so loud the lantern glass shattered. It wasn't a woman anymore. It was a distorted, multi-layered shriek that sounded like 10 people screaming in different pitches at once. Connor began to pray. Kyle fired a shot through the roof of the tent, the muzzle flash blinding us for a split second. In that flash, I saw a silhouette against the tent wall. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, with unnaturally long, thin arms reaching toward the zipper. After the shot, the weight of the forest seemed to lift. We heard something heavy crashing through the brush, snapping branches the size of my arm as it retreated into the canyon. We sat in that broken tent back to back, with the rifle leveled at the door until the sun finally bled through the trees. When we finally stepped outside, the horror wasn't over. Our heavy 50-pound cooler had been moved 30 yards into the creek, but it hadn't been opened. Our grocery bags were shredded, and the contents, every piece of bread, every can, every wrapper, were laid out in a massive, perfect spiral that centered exactly on our tent. And in the very center of the spiral, resting on my sleeping bag, was a single, obsidian black stone that was still warm to the touch. We left everything behind. The tents, the gear, the supplies. We ran until our lungs burned. As we reached the truck, I looked back at the mountain. The fog was rolling in, and for a second, I saw a flash of orange high up in the canopy. A strip of a hunter's vest, swaying in the wind like a flag of surrender. We don't go to the mountains anymore, because once you've heard that sound, you realize the mountains have been waiting for you to come back. Story 4, The Phase Shift Predator. This final account comes from a veteran hunter in the Appalachian backwoods, a man who spent 30 years tracking everything from black bears to mountain lions. He thought he knew the woods. He was wrong. It was late October, the dead zone of the season. He was positioned in a blind near a natural salt lick, waiting for a buck he'd been tracking for months. But as the sun began to set, the forest didn't just go quiet, it went empty. The wind stopped. About 50 yards away between two ancient oaks, the air started to shimmer. It looked like the heat haze you see on a highway in July, but it was vertical. It moved with a sickening fluid motion, like something was stepping between layers of reality. He rubbed his eyes, thinking it was a trick of the light. But then the shimmer spoke. It didn't use a voice. It used his own thoughts. He heard a voice in his head, not his own, but a distorted, echoed version of his young daughter's voice, calling for him from the center of that shimmering air. "Daddy, I'm cold. Come help me." His daughter was 300 miles away at home. Terrified, he raised his rifle and looked through the high-powered scope. Through the glass, the shimmer became a nightmare. He saw a figure that was folded in on itself, limbs that were too long, skin that looked like it was made of moving shadows, and eyes that didn't reflect light. They absorbed it. It wasn't just standing there. It was phase-shifting, flickering in and out of existence like a failing light bulb. Every time it flickered, it was 5 feet closer. He didn't fire. He knew instinctively that a lead bullet wouldn't touch something that wasn't fully in our world. He dropped his rifle and began to back away, keeping his eyes locked on the distortion. The thing began to mimic him, backing up when he backed up, pausing when he paused. It was mocking his fear. Then the shimmer snapped. A sound like a lightning strike echoed through the canyon, and the figure became solid for a fraction of a second. It was a pale, gray-skinned entity with no face, only a vertical slit where a mouth should be. It lunged. He turned and sprinted for his ATV, not caring about the gear he left behind. He could hear the thing right behind him, but it wasn't running, it was teleporting. He'd hear a pop of displaced air to his left, then his right, then directly above him in the branches. He barely made it to the ATV. As he roared away, he looked back over his shoulder. The shimmering haze was standing in the middle of the trail, holding his discarded rifle. But the rifle was melting, turning into a black, oily liquid in the entity's hands. The last thing he heard as he hit the main road was that same voice, his daughter's voice, whispering directly into his ear. Despite the wind and the engine, "You forgot your toys, Daddy." He sold his gear the next day. He hasn't stepped foot on grass, let alone into a forest, in 3 years. Because once a predator like that has your scent, it doesn't matter where you hide. It just hasn't decided to phase into your bedroom yet. This final story didn't happen in the woods. It happened to me yesterday while I was filming in my room. I was completely alone in the house. The doors were locked and the silence was absolute. Suddenly, the air went ice cold. I watched my camera's face detection box start flickering, locking onto the empty space directly behind my shoulder. Then it happened, a heavy, deliberate thud against the wall, followed by the sound of wet footsteps in the hallway. I realized then that the things we talk about on this channel don't stay in the stories. Sometimes they follow us home. If your camera starts hunting for a face in the dark behind you, stop filming and get out. If you survive this video, smash that subscribe button and join the hub. Send us your own footage. If you've caught something you can't explain, I'm your narrator, and this is Scary Hub. Sleep with one eye open tonight. We'll be watching.